The Gestapo called her the most dangerous of all Allied spies in France, and they spent years hunting a woman they didn't know walked on an artificial leg she'd nicknamed Cuthbert. In 1940, an American woman sat in a French hospital bed in Turkey, recovering from a hunting accident that had nearly killed her, and made a decision that would eventually put her name on a Gestapo most wanted list with a price attached to it that few other agents in occupied Europe ever carried. She decided the loss of her leg was not going to be the end of anything. Virginia Hall was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1906 into a comfortable family with expectations that did not include what she eventually became. She wanted a career in the Foreign Service, the kind of life that took educated young Americans to embassies and consulates across Europe. She studied languages. She was fluent in French, German, and Italian by the time she reached her 20s, and she pursued a position with the American diplomatic service with the kind of focus that suggested she had already decided this was simply what her life was going to look like. The State Department did not agree. Women were not generally considered for the senior diplomatic track in the 1930s, regardless of qualifications. Hall took the consular positions that were available to her, clerical roles in American consulates in Europe, and kept working, kept applying, kept being told no. In 1933 in Turkey, while hunting, her shotgun discharged accidentally. The injury was severe enough that doctors amputated her left leg below the knee. She was fitted with a wooden prosthetic limb, heavy, awkward, the kind of device that the medical technology of the period produced for amputees and called sufficient. She named it Cuthbert. The naming was not sentimental. It was the kind of thing a person does when they have decided that something is going to be part of their life, whether they like it or not, and have chosen to relate to it with humor rather than grief. When war broke out in Europe in 1939, Virginia Hall was in France. She joined the French ambulance service, working near the front lines during the brief catastrophic campaign that ended with France's collapse in June 1940. She evacuated to Spain and then to Britain after the French surrender, one of thousands of people scattered across Europe trying to find their way to somewhere the war was still being fought from the right side. In London, she encountered the Special Operations Executive. The SOE had been formed with a mandate that Winston Churchill reportedly summarized as setting Europe ablaze, an organization tasked with supporting resistance movements in occupied countries, conducting sabotage, gathering intelligence, and generally making German occupation as difficult and costly as possible through means that conventional military forces could not employ. The SOE needed people who could move through occupied France without drawing attention. People who spoke the language fluently, understood French culture and behavior at a level that went beyond textbook learning, and could maintain a cover identity under sustained pressure. Virginia Hall fit this description almost perfectly, with one obvious complication. She had an artificial leg. The SOE's assessment of this complication was, in the context of what they were asking her to do, remarkably pragmatic. An artificial leg was a liability in situations requiring physical agility, running, climbing, certain kinds of evasion. But it was not in the more common day-to-day requirements of operating as an apparently ordinary civilian in occupied territory, necessarily disqualifying. She was accepted. In August 1941, Virginia Hall became one of the first female SOE agents sent into occupied France. Her cover was as an American journalist, a credible identity given her actual background and language skills, and one that provided a plausible reason for an American woman to be traveling, asking questions, and meeting people in Vichy, France, the nominally independent southern zone that Germany had not yet directly occupied. Operating from Lyon, Hall began building what intelligence work in occupied territory actually requires, not dramatic individual acts of sabotage, but the patient, unglamorous construction of networks, safe houses, communication channels, couriers who could move messages, and people without detection, contacts who could provide false papers, hiding places, local knowledge. She helped coordinate the movement of Allied airmen who had been shot down over France, getting them out of the country through escape lines that required coordination across multiple safe houses, false identities, and border crossings. She helped organize resistance cells, providing them with the training, communication links, and material support that connected isolated groups of French resistors to the broader Allied war effort. Lyon, under Vichy authority, was dangerous, but operated under a degree of restraint that changed dramatically in November 1942, when Germany occupied the previously unoccupied southern zone in response to the Allied invasion of North Africa. The Gestapo arrived in Lyon, and the Gestapo in Lyon was led by a man whose name became synonymous with the systematic destruction of resistance networks across the region, Klaus Barbie, who would later be known as the Butcher of Lyon. The intelligence apparatus that Barbie brought to Lyon was effective in ways that the previous Vichy security arrangements had not been. SOE networks across France were being penetrated, identified, and rolled up. Agents were being captured, interrogated under conditions that left little room for resistance, and the information extracted from them was being used to identify and capture other agents in turn. Virginia Hall's network in Lyon was not exempt from this pressure. By late 1942, with German occupation of the South underway and Gestapo activity intensifying, London made the assessment that Hall's position in Lyon had become too dangerous to sustain. She had been operating in the same area for over a year. Her network had contacts that German intelligence was actively working to identify. The risk calculation had shifted. She was ordered to leave France. The route out went south, towards Spain, across the Pyrenees Mountains, the same mountain range that thousands of refugees, downed airmen, and resistance members used as an escape route throughout the war when the alternative was capture. Crossing the Pyrenees on foot in winter was a serious physical undertaking for anyone. The terrain was steep, the weather was severe, and the crossing typically took multiple days of sustained walking through mountain conditions that tested the endurance of fit young men in good physical condition. Virginia Hall made this crossing on an artificial leg. Cuthbert, in the cold and the strain of mountain walking, was apparently causing her significant pain, to the point that during the crossing she reportedly sent a radio message back to London that has become one of the more quietly remarkable lines in SOE communication records, informing them that Cuthbert was being troublesome, and receiving back the reply that if Cuthbert was troublesome, she should consider having him eliminated. A message that, read without context, sounds like an instruction regarding a person, and was in fact about a wooden leg, communicated in code in case the message was intercepted. She completed the crossing. Spain, in late 1942 and early 1943, was not simply a safe destination. Hall was arrested by Spanish authorities, a common fate for people crossing the border without proper papers, regardless of which direction they were fleeing from. She spent time in Spanish detention before American diplomatic intervention secured her release. She made her way back to Britain, and then, having survived a year and a half of operating in occupied France, having built and run intelligence networks under increasing German pressure, having crossed mountains on a wooden leg to escape capture by one of the most effective Gestapo operations in occupied Europe, Virginia Hall asked to go back. The SOE's assessment was that Hall could not return to France in the same capacity. Her face, her cover identity, elements of her previous operation were too well known to networks that had been compromised. The Gestapo in Lyon had been actively hunting the woman behind significant portions of the resistance activity in the region, and while they may not have had a name or a clear physical description, the existence of an effective female agent operating in the area was known to them. Returning to France for Hall meant returning as someone else entirely. She trained in wireless communication, the radio operator's skills that SOE agents in the field used to maintain contact with London, sending and receiving coded messages on equipment that German radio detection units were actively trying to locate through direction-finding technology that made every transmission a calculated risk. She also transferred, in terms of which organization she would be working for, to the American Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, America's wartime intelligence service, which was building its own networks in occupied Europe in coordination with SOE as American involvement in the European theater expanded. In March 1944, Virginia Hall returned to France, this time by boat, landing on the Brittany coast, this time disguised as an elderly French peasant woman. Her appearance altered, her bearing changed, presenting herself as someone far older and far less notable than the woman the Gestapo in Lyon had been hunting. This time operating in central France, in the Haute-Loire region, in the lead-up to and aftermath of D-Day. The France that Hall returned to in 1944 was different from the France she had left in 1942.